Well, let's talk about the system because you have proposed a new bill, C-14, the Bail and Sentencing Reform Act.
We want to deal with the challenge we see where people are released on bail, particularly violent repeat offenders.
Is there an increase in repeat offenders committing crimes? Minister of Justice and Attorney General Sean Fraser on the BG Show. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, listen, you're the man who lays down the law in this country. That's a big deal.
Yeah, look, I think the people who actually enforce the law have all my respect in the world. I think there's a job that we have to do. Obviously, shifting the language of the criminal code, but you can't do that alone. You can't do it from behind closed doors on Parliament Hill. You got to work with partners who actually enforce the law on the ground, and you got to work with the provinces who administer the system. So it's a Team Canada effort.
Well, let's talk about the system because you have proposed a new bill, C-14, which is the Bail and Sentencing Reform Act.
Yeah.
What is that for people who don't understand?
So, look, it's pretty simple. It's designed to respond to very serious concerns that people have been raising with us about public safety.
And what are those concerns?
There's two main themes. The first is that we want to deal with the challenge we see where people are released on bail, particularly violent repeat offenders who then re-offend when they could have been incarcerated, potentially preventing a violent incident. And the second is sentencing, having stiffer penalties for very serious crimes to ensure the justice system actually maintains the faith of the Canadian public.
So what does that mean for like the average person? Because here in, let's say, the Toronto area, but even right across the country, there have been a lot of people who have been upset about, the rise in auto thefts, right? People just stealing cars off of people's driveways or the attempts to break into people's homes. What does that mean for those folks who are concerned about that?
So, look, you cited a couple of examples. And it really is about public safety and allowing Canadians to feel safe without fear in their communities. We've seen a slew of home invasions and auto thefts. Ontario is a very good example of where this legislation is going to have a positive impact. It's going to be harder for somebody who's been charged with violent home invasions or auto theft to actually be released on bail. One of the things that we're doing is establishing what's called reverse onuses. Instead of the Crown having to prove that you should be detained, we're going to flip that equation to make sure that in those circumstances and certain other violent offenses, that the accused actually has to demonstrate, based on clear information, why they should be released on the basis that they don't pose a threat to public safety. There's other measures that we include in there as well, both on the bail and sentencing side for both home invasions and auto theft. But this is really a reflection of what we've been hearing from ordinary Canadians who said, we can't accept this in Canada. We have to do something about crime because my family, my kids, they deserve to live safely in my neighborhood. And we're listening to them, and we're working with the cops in the province to actually change the laws to engender a feeling of security and to improve public safety.
So what has changed? Because Liberals have been in government for over 10 years, and it seems like the frustrations that we're talking about from Canadians is fairly recent. So who's to blame for this?
So I don't think it's pointing fingers and trying to attribute blame is a useful exercise. I think rather than, and you see people in politics be guilty of that often, when you don't have a solution, you try to point to somebody else as the problem. I just want to focus on the solutions. Right now, we know that there is a problem with violent repeat offenders being released and reoffending again and again. We want to take action, particularly when it comes to changing bail laws in Canada to ensure that it's harder for those people to get released if they pose a threat to the public safety. We have to work with the provincial governments. This has to be a team effort because they actually manage the administration of the bail system. The federal government isn't the one who's hiring provincial court judges, the crowns who actually run these processes. We don't manage the courthouse. We don't manage the community policing. We have to bring other levels of government with us. We can change the laws, but we have to work with them to ensure that they put the resources in place to manage the system. Similarly, on sentencing, we want to reflect what we hear from Canadians and frankly deal with very serious problems to signal to would-be criminals that we don't tolerate your behavior in Canada and you're going to face very serious penalties if you continue to commit crimes across our country that are having an impact on ordinary Canadians who simply want to live freely in their community.
But a lot of the outcry for bail reform has come from people on the right, conservatives. But what's the data behind that? Like, is there an increase in repeat offenders committing crimes? Do you have concrete data that supports that claim?
So we've seen over the last number of years, there has been an increase in crime and violent crime, although it changed last year. we started trending in a positive direction for the first time in quite a few years, where we actually see some positive signals on the horizon. Now, there were some changes made to bail reform previously. In my view, there is more that we can do, which is why I felt it necessary to advance this new legislation. If we continue to not only change the criminal laws, but also support the front line with investments for the federal government's part and the RCMP and with our border officers, both of which are going to have 1,000 new personnel and more prosecutors to keep up with the volume, we can actually do more to enforce the laws that exist. But if we want long-term solutions, we're going to have to make those upstream investments in things like mental health and addictions and affordable and supportive housing and youth programming to make sure we turn kids away from criminal lifestyle early on.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because I think a lot of people are going to hear this and they're going to feel like, okay, the Liberals are being tough on crime, right? Tougher on crime than, let's say, the Liberals under Justin Trudeau. But I think a lot of people are fearful that sometimes when you have tougher on crime rules, that can impact at-risk communities, like youth, for example, who are dealing with sky-high unemployment rates. They can't find a job. And unfortunately, when people can't find a job, they can't feed themselves, they can't pay for their bills. Unfortunately, they turn sometimes to crime. Not saying that's justified, but what is the counter effect? Because we can't just say tough on crime, but we're not supporting people and giving them opportunities to flourish.
Look, I'm reminded of Tony Blair, the former UK Prime Minister's approach to this. You can be tough on crime, but you also have to be tough on the causes of crime. You have to make sure that people have a roof over their head. You have to make sure people who are living with very challenging mental health circumstances, with addictions, have the support that they need and are treated with dignity.
So how do you balance that?
Well, you have to make investments. We are launching the largest investment in affordable and supportive housing in Canada's history with this new Build Canada Homes, a federal agency that's effectively going to be a public developer. We're going to work with provinces. We've signed agreements in recent years, the largest health transfer to provincial governments, and are saying this is not a blank check. You have to actually spend this money on certain areas, including specifically mental health. But the last leg of this stool is really to make the community investments that are going to support at-risk kids. We have a number of different programs that are aimed at that outcome, but we also have to work with other levels of government to ensure we're all pulling in the same direction. But if you're not dealing with those upstream investments, we can have some impact today with changes to the criminal laws, with more policing resources to keep communities safe. But you don't just want to have the resources in place to deal with crime after it happens. You want to create a society where people are less likely to offend in the first place. And to do that, you have to put the measures in place that allow them to be healthy, to be well, and to succeed as people, and to use your words, to flourish.
And listen, I think that's totally fair, right? But I'm wondering, for the average person, there's probably listening to this and they're like, okay, bail reforms, harsher laws, more people are going to be in jail. Now I'm thinking about, well, that's more people in jail, that's going to cost taxpayers more money. So who's going to pay for all this? Where are they going to be? Can our jails handle the extra capacity?
So look, this is a very nuanced question that you've asked. The starting point for me is that we need not accept the conclusion over the long term that there's going to be more people in jail. But we do need to address the fact that if someone commits a crime, more of the people who are charged with a crime and are convicted of a crime should be in jail, and more of the people who are violent repeat offenders should be detained. But the way that you actually reduce those numbers over time is not just by changing the bail and sentencing laws. It's by making the community investments in collaboration with other levels of government that are actually going to reduce incidents of crime in the first place. When the crime happens, there has to be consequence. But the real success is not how many people you've punished. It's how much crime you have prevented through those other measures. That said, we do believe that we need to have tougher laws as part of the strategy, because what we're seeing in communities is completely unacceptable. People need to have faith that the justice system will actually protect them and improve public safety, and it's hard for them to accept that when their experience is watching on their doorbell camera, watching people break into their neighbors' homes or steal a car in their neighborhood. We have to take action to ensure there are consequences for people who break the law, that people respect the law, don't violate the conditions of their bail, but at the same time remain a compassionate society that makes investments to help vulnerable people, which we know in the long term will have a very positive impact on crime reduction.
There is an organization that has come out in opposition of Bill C-14. That's the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. They said, and I quote, "It is a myth that bail is easy to obtain in Canada. As of last count, 76% of people in provincial and territorial jails are denied bail, a number that has tripled in 50 years. That's statistics that they're referencing. So what response do you have to the Canadian Civil Liberties Association?
First, I have enormous respect for the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and pretrial detention is something that you do need to address, but public safety is also something that you need to address. We've put forward measures that responds to calls from not just ordinary Canadians, but the people who also work within the system and the people who manage the system, saying that these are the fixes that we need to help make sure that we keep our communities safe. In particular, we worked very closely with law enforcement to understand what their perspective was. Where were the gaps in the system that were allowing violent repeat offenders to be released and to reoffend time and time again? We worked very closely with provincial governments who, as I mentioned, have the responsibility to manage the system, and they were calling for specific actions to ensure that they could actually protect the communities that they represent.
Which provincial governments were calling for these changes?
All of them.
Okay.
Without exception. In particular, I worked very closely with the government of Ontario, and I should say,
Doug Ford?
I worked. Yes, I spoke personally with Premier Ford. I also worked very closely on many occasions with his Attorney General, Doug Downey, who is extremely collaborative, understands how the system works, and wants to work with us to effect changes that will keep communities safe.
So will it be, for example, Ontario's responsibility, Doug Ford's responsibility to ensure that there's enough judges and jail capacity if there is an increase in people having to stay in jail?
It's very clear that those are provincial responsibilities.
So it's not the federal government?
We set the laws, the province runs the system. That's how it breaks down.
My only wonder, though, is that for us who live in Ontario, I mean, we see our hospitals, they can't even be staffed by nurses. There's shortages, emergency rooms are closing, schools can't be fixed. For people in Ontario who feel like the basics can't even be done by Doug Ford, do you trust him to be able to administer this?
I trust that the Federation of Canada is set up in the way where we have the appropriate government who's best positioned to make decisions on given policy areas, actually make those decisions. The federal government has not, over the course of our nation's history, developed the expertise and the practice through implementation of running the bail system. We have developed expertise on criminal law policy because we have responsibility for the criminal code. It's not my job to come in and tell provinces how to run their healthcare systems and how to discharge their areas of clear provincial responsibility. But the starting point for me is I can't try to solve challenges that exist within provincial systems by weakening Canada's criminal laws. I don't think Canadians would accept that. They want me to develop a framework that is aimed at improving public safety and keeping their families safe. My starting point is to put those rules in place and then working with the province to understand where we can have a role to be supportive of their efforts to actually run the system effectively. But again, the long-term solution here is not simply just to build more detention facilities and put more people in jail. If you commit a crime, you're going to face tougher outcomes, certainly, and you should as a result of this legislation. But the long-term success will be, have we made the investments that actually reduce crime up front so fewer people are facing those charges in the long term?
So let's say next year, over the next course of the next 3 years, if this bill passes, if crime continues to go up, would you look at this as a failure?
You have to assess very carefully if crime goes up or down, why it's going down. If it goes down, but it's not because of this bill, I'm not going to claim that this bill was the reason why. If it goes down and this bill was part of the success story, then that would be a success, certainly. But you can't pull out one particular bill in isolation and say this is the point of success or failure when you're assessing where crime goes relative to where it is today. We have seen a positive trend just beginning in the last year that we have statistics. But I hope that trend continues. But it's going to be through a combination of a change to our criminal laws that have tougher penalties for people who commit serious crimes, through investments by federal and provincial and municipal governments to support law enforcement and preventing crime and investigating it when it takes place, and finally, a collaborative effort that's actually going to have those upstream investments in place to reduce crime overall. You can't do any of it without doing all of it, and we want to be a good partner who contributes solutions to all.
All right, so we're going to look at the data, and then we're going to talk over the course of the next few years, and we're going to assess the data. Minister of Justice and Attorney General Sean Fraser, thanks so much for joining me on the VG Show.
Pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much. I gotta reach.